All right, thanks. And here we go. So just kind of as a checkpoint where we're at, we're on April 8th, I believe. And today is kind of a review day. And so at first I thought we were getting into module 4 before I looked at this actual agenda. And so this is kind of a good place because module 4 is really, really big. So if we don't have a lot to go through on the review, right? So this is your guys' time, right? Ask the questions that you have, kind of go through the lab. If you've gone through it, maybe we'll get you to share if you're comfortable with that. But let's talk about what you have found helpful with the course, what you want to go kind of back through, any of that, or any questions that you have from modules 1 through 3, especially for those that have been here. Let me pull this up, actually go all the way back to, right, so we had the module 3 lab, and you're supposed to go through the lab script and create a budget fact table into your model. So I happen to have the answer model, and if I share this, you should have something that comes out like this, right? So now we have our geography to our customer dimension, and customer going to sales, campaign going to sales, product going to sales, and date going to sales. So sales is one of our, the terminology in this class, right, is a fact table. The terminology that I'm seeing used around the community lately has been lookup and values table, right, for people that aren't as deep in the data warehousing. So this is, think of this as a values table, right? It's going to have the values that are going to be accumulated and reported upon, where the lookups are going to be your attributes, and they got lookup values for you to do your slicing, filtering, your reporting basically on. So the lab was to add the budget into the model, and the budget connects to the category segment, which goes through over to product, and by date. Okay, so so this is at a different grain than what sales is at, right? Because sales, it goes down to a product, customer, grain, product, customer, date, right? Campaign is put on there. So it's going to move it down to that lowest level grain, to where budget is at a higher grain. So I haven't read forward a whole lot. I read a little bit into the next module, but we'll probably get into some of the things, what you have to do to report on the differences on that grain, right? And if we
Kevin,
look at, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, in the model, I'm sorry. Oh, you were just about to. I was just going to ask because it visually, it looks like, it looks like a cycle, but there's directions on the arrows, so it doesn't make a cycle. But if you, because sometimes, you want to go in and you want to be able to look up in both directions. So, I'll open up the properties on the relationship and say, let's make this, I forget what the property is, but there's a way you could say, I want to go both directions. But if we did that here, would it create a cycle and then Power BI would reject it?
A circular.
Yeah, circular. Like, because you see how it does make a circle, but not if you look at the arrows, you can see it's not a circle. Because the arrows don't let you, I don't think, right? You can't go all the way in a circle if you respect the direction of the arrows.
Yeah, I mean, if you do change to, and the next module gets into bi-directional, right? In module 4, when I read ahead just a little while ago, this is just in time class, if you don't know. I do things just in time. So I was reading through all the module stuff, and it gets into the concept that you're talking about, right? The bidirectional filtering. And
Right.
yes, you can get into either something that could be a circular relationship if it detects that, or more than likely what you'll get into is multiple paths to get to something, which introduces ambiguity. And so we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we go into module 4, either later this hour or next week. Is that
Okay,
all right to go?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, so the reason that you do this, right, is that you could drill across, right? So you could drill across from sales, and you could get sales by date, and you could get budget by date or attributes of date. Now, looking at the data that actually comes in, we look at these budget and the budget scenarios. It's kind of interesting, I think. Okay, so they got budget and forecast, right? If you look, each one of these is set to the first of the month. So really, when you're doing a drill across here, if you're looking at sales for today, right, April 8th, and you're trying to compare it to budget for April 8th, you're going to get no budget for April 8th because it's only one record per month. So even though this is tied to the date dimension, it's really only at a month grain, right? So you want to think about your again, your granularity, right? So your granularity is defined by the dimensions that are related to it, but it could also be defined by the data that goes into the actual table. So while this is going to be at a day level, this is going to be at a month level. We could still get across if we summarize sales up to a month. Now we have a valid comparison to budget for that month. And we could do that just by producing the measures and doing what's called, we're reporting off of the date dimension at the same grain.
Okay, and I guess that answers what I was going to ask, if it automatically understands dates and follows the month if you went from the month in date dimension down to sales, but you're saying you doesn't do that automatically. You have to build the calculation or whatever to say what the month is, and then that's how you follow down.
Or the visual.
Or in the visual.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know what visuals they have here, but if I just make another visual, right? And we do this, we'll start with a matrix. That's interesting. They got all these custom visuals in here, right? And so we do our date dimension and we do date.
Okay, so the visual gives you the hierarchy.
Oh, because they got automatic hierarchies turned on. I hate that. Yeah, this is one thing I recommend not doing. These are auto tables. So this one has the automatic date set up on there. So
yeah, that's how we know you're using the provided answer key and
yeah,
not
exactly,
the answer key you came up with on your own.
Mine definitely would not have this. So let me get rid of this. Oh, of course. Oh, you know what? Let me try this. Maybe they just hid it. I'm viewing the hidden. Okay, let's go back here. Sorry. See what their date table looks like. Date. Date. And if I pull this, yeah, this automatic calculation, it drives me nuts. So let me pull month and day and then take it down. All right.
How come your icons
do that
look
as
different? Your icons for drilling look different than mine, and I did just update. They had little circles around the
on the matrix.
forget what I just
Well,
said.
that's a good question, because normally mine look like what you're talking about. This looks like an old one, so I don't know if this model something or if this something needs to be updated here. But I'm gonna go back to table anyways, just so I could see month and day, right? And then I'm gonna put a budget amount on there. And you see how it just goes down to the first day of every single month, right? But now if I go to sales and just put sales on there, you see sales has a value every single day. So you need to be aware of this inside your data when you're producing your visuals. Now, if I change this table and I make it only by month, now this is a valid comparison. And the other problem that we have here is because in their budget, they got 2 scenarios. Actually, let me do it this way. I do filters on this page, and I only want the budget scenario. Oh, that should change that number. It does. It's still a big number. I don't know why why they put budget in this big and they put sales down. They had.
Well, is that a decimal point? I can't read that because it's really small. Is it 22 million? Isn't it 22 million versus 65 million?
No, it's 20. Oh yeah, it's the formatting.
Yeah, so the sales exceeded the budget.
Well, the sales has cents in it. We'll go back, change this. Isn't that a little bit easier? I mean, I can make.
Yeah, that's easier to
right,
see.
even though it might be smaller on your screen, right? Just because of the way of the formatting, having it had 4 decimal places, taking the decimal places off, I could easily compare and see what Amin was able to see quite easily. Is sales is easily beating budget every single month. Those are visualization techniques.
I had a question regarding the monthly. If we want to compare month and quarter in the same table, like for instance, we have month, January, February, March, and then after that, we want to add quarter one, which says quarter one budget and quarter one sales. So I was trying to do that in the lab, but I was not able to bring it all in the same table. Like if somebody wants to see first hierarchy as budget, quarter, and then further drill it down. Yeah, so we have Q1 on first 3, but like there's no summation, like total, what was the total quarter one?
If you use a matrix, that'll do that.
Oh, a matrix. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, see, and then the matrix will build out the hierarchy on your rows or on your columns. And then you include totals. So now here I have the totals for quarter one against the quarter one sales, and then I could break down each one.
And we can also have another column for the difference, like what was the miss between
Correct.
budget. Okay.
And so how would you do that? What would you end up?
I was thinking of creating a separate measure to, but I didn't get to that point to actually create one and try it out. So
But
that's what my thought is right now.
Yep, but you're exactly on the right point, right? Is you would create a whole new measure. So let's say I create that measure in the budget fact. It doesn't matter what table I always create it in, right? So I call it budget var for variance, right? And if you can choose which way you want to do it. I'm going to choose to go sales minus budget, so that a positive number will be good, right? I could choose I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to choose that currency. I'm going to go back to 0. And now I could put my variance into the same thing.
Okay.
And maybe even align it so that I could see.
I think you're subtracting the percentage, Kevin.
Yeah, you're right. I grabbed the wrong, wasn't reading. That's funny. Why doesn't this come up? Oh, you know why? Because this is an implicit, I grabbed this. This is an implicit measure.
Oh, because budget amount is not a measure, it's a column, I think.
It's a column, right? So what I have to do is I could do this in here of doing sum and then budget amount, and that's going to do the same.
Okay, but we have to have a measure for both sales and budget amount.
That's the recommended way, right? Again, this is their model, right? Normally what you're going to do is turn anything that's in your values table into a measure, and then you'll hide these. In fact, I hide and I turn off I turn the summarization to default, or to none, I mean. So then this way it doesn't have any summarization, and then you have to write explicit measures. It's usually better, it's a best practice to have explicit measures than implicit measures.
Oh, but in this case, both the budget and the sales should be connected, linked, relations to the date then which we have, right?
You're normally going to have it connected through a date, but on this, what I can do, because category segment connects through to sales and connects through to budget, I can on here add category segment as well, and you can decide where you want that. Let me find category segment. Maybe you want to do that as a do category as a column.
Right.
And now that'll break out this report, this matrix. And of course, you could use it for any other setup. I have my categories up top, and I'm getting valid numbers because of this relationship through the model, these two relationships.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that to me was, I guess, kind of like what they're trying to come out with from that lab exercise. I don't know if they got into the visualizations, because honestly, I didn't read it all. But that, that's how this model would work for you. Now, like on the sales side, you could break sales down by product, but you won't be able to break the budget down by product.
Can you go back and explain why?
Sure. Because we get to, we can summarize sales by category because we go through product and we have a relationship that flows through this way, right? Following our arrows. But we don't have anything for product that has the arrows going to budget. We're stopped here, right? Because the relationship flows the other direction.
Oh, but if in this case, this assuming a different scenario where this cat seg dim table was not there and budget fact was connected to product dim, then the two-way would have been possible.
Yes, if you do your budgeting at a product level, right, which some companies might, depends on how granular, right? We're back to talking on the grain, how granular the budgeting occurs. So yes, if the budgeting occurs at the product level, yes, you would be able to compare the two. Then you could say, well, I'm able to compare it, but I'm not to the customer level. I doubt anybody does their budgeting for sales like this at a product customer intersection, but I have seen other things that's kind of, instead of thinking of it as a product like a retail product, think of it as a service. And there are some companies that might try to budget that at that intersection. It's really hard, but they try.
Yeah, well, my company does it for both product and customers. So every customer has their own target within each product. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then you would end up relating both product and customer to your budget. And then, so the more you relate, more you get it down to the same grain as what your sales is coming in at, then then you can compare by it, right?
Right.
By having all those relationships.
Right.
Okay, good conversation. Anything else on the earlier 3 modules? And let me maybe we'll kind of go back through real quick. Module 1 was really basic, so maybe there's not a lot of questions on that, right? I think we now should have a good understanding of what is meant by the data model in Power BI. Consequences of the data model design, right, could be slow performance, or you won't get the results that you want. And the data type handling, right? You want items that are going to be aggregated up to be numerics. Most of the time, your attributes and your dimensions are going to be text values in order to help display out better.
So I guess I'm always interested in this sort of from Power Query till when you get to Power BI on the front end. Like we had that one slide where it talked about just specifically on data types, how Power Query might tell you it's a decimal, but there's the format versus the type, I think was the thing, right? So, but then there's other things like you can tell in Power Query, you can tell your table has keys. There's an AdKey function, but that doesn't do anything, I don't think, when you map it over to Power BI, because as I think you talked about, you can only relate tables by a single field. You can't have a composite field being your key in this view, right?
Are you talking about in Power Query, like if you have using the index, add index?
Yeah, well, I found something called AdKey, which was supposed to speed up my merges, because that guy's blog, Chris, somebody has a blog, and he's like, when your merges are really slow, you can tell Power Query what your tables are, what your keys are in your table before you do the merge. So you can say, customer ID, comma, product ID is key in my such and such table. And so it's interesting to me because that's part of the data model that's here on this side. But then I guess that gets lost when you come over to because you have to kind of rebuild the data model in the Power BI side.
Well, I don't consider this the data model
Okay.
because this is to go use more of a data warehousing term. This is your ETL layer, which is ETL stands for export, transform, and load, right? Or others like to say ELT, export, load, and transform, right?
Okay.
So the data model to me needs to keep the relationships and everything. Just because you're doing merges and appends doesn't mean you have a relationship,
Okay.
right? So this is just each one of these, what queries they call it, I think of as tables, okay?
Right.
And each table could be independent. You know, it's not until you bring it into Power Query and make these relationships that it actually becomes a model.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
So,
that makes sense.
so then the keys in that sense of what you're talking about is more, and I'm not exactly sure where you add them because
I didn't see it
probably,
in the UI. It was only in the advanced editor. Like you just
oh,
do
okay.
table.AdKey and then.
So what that must be doing behind the scenes is it's a helper step to Power Query. And depending on where Power Query is run at, it could actually do different things. If you're using data flows and you're using a premium workspace, behind the scenes, data flows will stand up an a SQL Server instance and actually create and load the tables and then start using functionality that SQL Server has to make it run faster. And in that case, it could be adding indexes to do that. It may be adding indexes within your, it might even be doing that in Power Query on what's called the mashup engine when things run inside the mashup engine to make it faster. Indexes help, right? They make things run faster. So that's what I would think that that's doing, is it's adding an index, and when it's a key index, it knows those value combinations are unique, so it can produce the index in a better way, and it maybe even sort them in that way, so that everything is faster. So it's you're giving it a helper step.
And I guess I felt like I was starting to build my model in this side because I'm, creating separate tables. This is where I break apart, right? My fact table from my dimension table. Like I'm doing things that feel like I'm building that model, and the keys felt like they were part of that. The types on the columns feel like they're part of that. But
yeah, so it's a yes and no answer, right? Yes, you are you're starting to build your model, because in order for you to build the model with these proper relationships, you have to break things out into your proper lookup and values, or dimensions and fact and dimensions, to say it the same way. You need to break out and have each one of these as queries or tables inside your Power Query, your transformation part, right? Because if you can't, then you can't do it over here in the the model area. Now there may be other steps that are done to help Power Query and your M language to run faster that may or may not make it fully into this side. Does that?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It's just like I hadn't thought about it that way, that because in my head it was all part of building a model, and then it felt like I was losing stuff. But I understand why. I mean, it's fine. It just was, I hadn't really reflected on that. So.
And when you start kind of going another step further, let's say 80% of what's in here is shared by multiple models, right? Power BI reports. You might move all of this Power Query stuff to be in data flows, right? So then the only thing that's in your Power Query of one PBIX file is just connecting to that data flow and bringing in the data. And in those data flows, they're naming everything tables, right? So it's producing all of those different tables. So that's why we continue to try to teach that it is kind of broken apart. Yeah, it all comes together to produce one thing. I find it easy to, right, it happens to be, I think a lot of times a male trait. I think in boxes. Everything in my mind is contained to one box, and the boxes don't cross unless I actually drill a hole in the box and make them cross. But everything in my mind is individual boxes, right? So all of this Power Query, one box. It does not cross to the model.